question of who is pulling the strings.
So Piers Morgan just dropped a bombshell analysis about how Netanyahu systematically manipulated Trump into the Iran war. And frankly, he's absolutely right. We're about to hear Professor Mearsheimer break down how America got trapped in an unwinnable conflict that's destroying Trump's presidency. Let's break this down.
And the crux of it is that after a number of different aspirations that were espoused by the Americans at the start of the war, including regime change and so on, they seem to have centered now the Trump administration on we have to stop Iran developing a nuclear weapon as the purpose for the war, which means that the victory can only be achieved if that is established. And you can only establish that, it seems to me, if you can be seen to have provably destroyed or have surrendered Iran's enriched uranium. If you don't get that result, I don't see how you can claim to have stopped them developing a nuclear weapon should they seek to do so.
This shifting of war goals is textbook mission creep. We saw this exact pattern in Iraq. Started with WMDs, then became regime change, then democracy building. The nuclear enrichment demand is impossible to verify without complete Iranian surrender, which makes this an endless war by design.
Do you think the Americans have underestimated in a massive way the Iranian ability to control the Strait of Hormuz and their willingness to attack the Gulf state neighbors? Because it seems to me the double-pronged way they've gone about both of those things has been a very effective response to the military attack, in which they clearly faced overwhelming military superiority from the Americans and Israelis.
Iran's Strait of Hormuz strategy is brilliant asymmetric warfare. 20% of global oil passes through that choke point daily. They've turned America's military superiority into an economic liability. Classic David versus Goliath tactics that are actually working against the superpower.
Massive economic issues, not just for America, but for everyone that uses that strait. But the political damage of the rising gas prices, rising energy prices generally, also the more slow-burning rise in food prices because the fertilizer couldn't get through either. All this is politically very toxic for Donald Trump, isn't it? I mean, the polling already shows his approval rating hitting new lows. The number of Americans that oppose this war is rising. Those two numbers will only get worse for him as this goes on. And then he's got the midterms coming in November. What do you feel about the political fallout from this?
He's nailing the political reality here. LBJ lost re-election over Vietnam, Carter over Iran hostages, Bush Sr. over recession during Gulf War. Combining unpopular war with economic pain is electoral poison. Trump's approval ratings confirm Americans are rejecting this Netanyahu-pushed conflict.
I also think that for all the bellicose rhetoric he has about we're going to take out all the power plants in Iran and so on, the truth about that, the cold hard reality, is that Iran still maintains a huge number of ballistic missiles, and they could easily attack, as they've already shown a propensity to do, the oil refineries of the Gulf state neighbors. And they could go further, and if their own desalination plants get taken out in Iran, they could do the same to the Middle Eastern Gulf state neighbors. And if they did that, they could basically stop water supply in some of those states. I mean, it could be really incredibly serious, almost borderline apocalyptic for the people in those countries.
The desalination vulnerability is terrifying and underreported. Saudi Arabia gets 70% of its water from desalination plants. One Iranian missile strike could create a humanitarian catastrophe affecting millions. This escalation ladder has no exit ramps once it starts.
I just think Donald Trump should get out of this as best he can, as fast as he possibly can. I see no longer term way that this doesn't get a lot worse.
Mearsheimer called the Ukraine war outcome correctly when establishment experts were wrong. His track record on predicting geopolitical disasters is unmatched. When he says get out now, that's strategic analysis from someone who understands how these conflicts actually end.
But Alan, I would say, I just don't think that's right when it comes to the Iran war, because we know from the big New York Times deep dive last week that Benjamin Netanyahu, on his 7th or 8th trip to the White House in a matter of months, sat in the Situation Room at the White House with the head of Mossad joining on the big screen and sold Donald Trump the idea that there was a chance to decapitate the leadership in Iran, and that as a result, the IRGC would collapse from within, the people would rise up, and they'd all be too distracted to even think about the Strait of Hormuz.
The New York Times documented this manipulation in detail. Netanyahu literally sat in our Situation Room selling Trump fantasy scenarios. The promised IRGC collapse never happened. The uprising never came. America got played by a foreign leader pursuing his own agenda.
And he said to us clearly on camera that America preemptively struck in Iran because Israel had told them that they were going to attack Iran, and they knew that if that happened, Iran would attack American interests.
Rubio's admission is staggering. America launched preemptive war because Israel threatened to act unilaterally. That's the tail wagging the dog. We're not Israel's ally anymore. We're their military contractor taking orders from Tel Aviv instead of making our own decisions.
One of the reasons I think that Israel's been getting increasingly unpopular is because anyone that dares to criticize the Israeli government, and I stand by my suggestion that Benjamin Netanyahu has been pulling some strings with Trump because he managed to persuade the fourth American president.
Netanyahu has now convinced 4 consecutive presidents to fight his wars. Bush on Iran sanctions, Obama on nuclear deal threats, Biden on Gaza support, Trump on direct war. This pattern shows systematic foreign manipulation of American foreign policy across both parties.
I mean, what was clear from the New York Times piece, whichever phraseology you want to use, the reality is that the Israelis in that meeting in the White House Situation Room presented a series of events to Trump, which many of Trump's own people highly disputed. In fact, some of them found it ridiculous. But they presented a sequence of events which simply hasn't materialized. So however we want to categorize it or describe what happened, Alan, the truth is that Trump went all in on the Israeli playbook for what would happen if they attacked the leadership in Iran and what would then follow.
Trump ignored his own Pentagon and CIA advisors who called the Israeli intelligence ridiculous. Instead, he trusted foreign spies over American experts. That's not alliance coordination. That's a foreign government hijacking our national security decision-making process completely.
But Iran could come out of this more radicalized, more battle-hardened, more emboldened because they now know they can control the Strait of Hormuz in a way that paralyzes the global economy, and they can put all the Gulf states on notice that they can destroy their business model in a heartbeat if they want to.
Failed military interventions always strengthen the target regime. Iran now knows it can paralyze global markets, threaten Gulf allies, and survive American assault. We've accidentally taught them exactly how to hurt us while making them more dangerous than before.
Almost like they know this could become a real sword of Damocles for the Republican candidate in 2028. Is that your sense about what's going on here?
DeSantis, Ramaswamy, and other 2028 hopefuls are already distancing themselves from this war. They see the polling. 60% of Americans oppose it. They're positioning themselves as the anti-war candidates who will clean up Trump's Netanyahu-influenced foreign policy disasters.
Is the ultimate beneficiary from all this likely to be China?
Yes.
Absolutely. While America burns through resources fighting Iran, China expands in the Pacific unchallenged. This is classic imperial overstretch, exactly how the Soviet Union collapsed, fighting expensive wars while ignoring the real strategic competitor gaining ground everywhere else.
And everything to do with that has been really dismantled in a sharp and awful way by what's happened because people don't feel safe. They've probably been made aware of how close they are to Iran and how dangerous that potentially is and so on. How do they come through this, do you think? And how damaging has it been for the Gulf states?
The Gulf states invested $2 trillion in Vision 2030 diversification projects. Dubai, Qatar, UAE built their entire post-oil futures on being safe financial hubs. One war has destroyed decades of economic planning and hundreds of billions in foreign investment.